It's midnight in the Atlantic. A submarine fires. A torpedo is in the water, hunting a floating city worth 5,000 lives. And in the next 60 seconds, 3 silent traps will decide if it hits or disappears into empty ocean. This is the part nobody tells you. The Ford doesn't just take a punch, it makes the ocean lie. First, it throws a ghost into the water that sounds more real than 100,000 tons of steel. Then it bends the torpedo's math with speed and wake. And before that weapon ever got close, a ring of hunters tried to kill the shot before it left the tube. Tonight we're opening that hidden world. Because that torpedo isn't dumb, it listens. It calculates range, bearing, and speed. It updates every second. And if it thinks you're the target, it will follow you until the warhead detonates under your keel. One hit can break the spine of a carrier, so the Ford doesn't run. It fights back with silence, deception, and geometry. 3 traps, 3 layers of engineering and tactics that turn the ocean into a weapon against the weapon. And it starts with a sound you'll never hear. The first trap is a lie. A ghost dragged behind the ship on a cable, screaming into the water. It's called a towed acoustic decoy, and to a torpedo's ears, it sounds more like a carrier than the carrier does. Here's how it works. A modern heavyweight torpedo hunts by listening. Passive sonar picks up machinery noise, propeller cavitation, hull vibrations. The louder you are, the easier you die. So the Navy spent decades making the Ford quiet. Machinery mounted on springs, propellers designed to shed bubbles without screaming, acoustic tiles on the hull that swallow sound instead of bouncing it back. The result is a ship that weighs over 100,000 tons but whispers through the ocean. And that's the setup for the trap. Because while the Ford stays quiet, the decoy gets loud. It's towed a few hundred yards behind the ship, emitting precisely tuned noise that mimics a warship's acoustic signature. Louder, clearer, more attractive. The torpedo's seeker picks up 2 targets. One faint, one bright. And it chooses the decoy every single time. The deployment happens fast. When the carrier's defensive systems detect a torpedo in the water, the decoy streams out from a handling system on the stern. It's not sitting ready in the water all the time. It's stored, deployed on command, and towed at a depth and distance calculated to pull the weapon away from the ship's actual hull. The cable is long enough to create separation, but strong enough to survive high-speed maneuvers. And the decoy itself is built to survive. It has to keep broadcasting even while being dragged through violent turns at 30 knots. The acoustic signature it emits isn't random noise. It's engineered to match the frequency spectrum of a large surface combatant. Blade rate from the propellers, machinery harmonics, hull resonance. The decoy doesn't just make sound, it makes the right sound. And because it's smaller and purpose-built, it can be louder than the ship without tearing itself apart. To a passive acoustic seeker, it looks like the main target lit up and moved a few hundred yards to the side. The torpedo corrections course and commits. Now add maneuver. The carrier doesn't just drag the decoy in a straight line. As soon as the torpedo is detected, the ship turns. Hard. The decoy swings wide on its tow cable, separating from the ship's actual position. The torpedo homes in on the loudest return. It commits, and the carrier slips out of the threat cone while the weapon chases a box full of electronics and noise generators. Some strike groups deploy multiple decoys if the threat level is high. 2 decoys on different bearings create confusion. The torpedo seeker has to choose between multiple strong contacts. And while it's deciding, the carrier is opening range and the escorts are prosecuting the submarine that fired the shot. But here's the edge case nobody talks about. Not all torpedoes bite the same way. Passive acoustic seekers love the decoy. Active sonar seekers, the kind that ping and listen for echoes, can sometimes tell the difference between a small decoy and a massive hull. And wake-homing torpedoes don't care about sound at all. They follow the turbulent trail of disturbed water behind a ship. One decoy can't fool every seeker type. So the Ford doesn't rely on just one trap. It layers them. The ghost buys time. It pulls the weapon off course. It gives the crew seconds to deploy the next trick. And in a torpedo engagement, seconds are the difference between a near miss and a funeral for 5,000 sailors. That's why every major surface combatant in the US Navy carries a version of this system. the AN/SLQ-25, called Nixie. It's been saving ships since the Cold War, and it's still the first line of defense because it works. The ocean hears a ghost, and the torpedo follows it into nowhere. But what if the decoy doesn't work? What if the torpedo is wake-homing or too close, or the seeker is smart enough to ignore the bait? That's when the Ford plays its second trap. It doesn't just move, it makes the ocean betray the weapon. The tactic is called a knuckle turn. The carrier goes to flank speed and turns hard, not a gentle course correction. A violent emergency turn that twists the ship's wake into a chaotic wall of bubbles, turbulence, and noise. To a torpedo seeker, that knuckle looks like a solid barrier. The acoustic picture scrambles, the Doppler shift changes, the bearing rate spikes, and the weapon loses lock. Here's the physics. A torpedo calculates an intercept course based on your speed, heading, and range. It predicts where you'll be in 30 seconds and steers toward that point. But if you suddenly change course and speed, the math breaks. The intercept triangle collapses. The torpedo has to recalculate. And while it's thinking, you're already somewhere else. The Ford class has a tactical diameter, the width of the circle it makes during a full-speed turn, that's surprisingly tight for a ship this size. That agility matters. A tighter turn means you can change heading faster, create the knuckle sooner, and force the torpedo into a longer recalculation loop. Every second the weapon spends thinking is a second you're not where it expected you to be. Speed matters more than most people realize. The Ford class can push over 30 knots. That's fast for a floating city. And every knot of speed you add lengthens the time it takes for the torpedo to reach you. A torpedo doing 45 knots chasing a target doing 30 knots only has a 15-knot speed advantage. That cuts the closing rate by 2/3 compared to a stationary target. Cut across your own wake, force the weapon into the turbulence, and you've just bought another 10 or 15 seconds. Enough time for the decoy to pull it further off target. Enough time for the screen to prosecute the submarine that fired it. The math is brutal and simple. If a torpedo has a 10-mile range and you're doing 30 knots, you cover half a mile every minute. The weapon covers 3/4 of a mile in that same minute. But if you turn and the weapon has to recalculate and chase a new intercept point, you've just stretched the engagement time. And longer engagement time means more opportunities for the decoy to seduce it, more time for the knuckle to blind it, and more time for a helicopter to drop a Mark 54 on the submarine before it can fire again. Now layer in wake-homing countermeasures. If the torpedo is following your disturbed water, you don't run straight. You turn across your own wake. You create crossing trails of turbulence. You force the seeker to choose which path to follow. And if you've timed it right, the weapon follows the older wake while you're already on a new heading, with the decoy trailing behind on a completely different bearing. The helmsman executing that turn isn't guessing. It's a rehearsed drill. The order comes from the tactical action officer. The helm responds in seconds. The ship heels into the turn. The wake boils. And the people below decks, the ones who don't see the ocean, feel the ship lurch and know exactly what's happening. They've trained for this. They trust the people on the bridge to buy them the time they need to survive. But here's the limit. This only works in open water. In shallow seas, confined straits, or heavy shipping lanes, you can't make a flank speed turn without risking collision or running aground. The Ford needs sea room to maneuver. Turn radius at 30 knots requires space, and if the submarine fires from close range in restricted waters, geometry and speed might not be enough. That's why the third trap exists. The one that tries to make sure the shot never happens in the first place. The third trap isn't on the carrier. It's 20 miles out, moving in a protective ring that most people never see. Destroyers with towed sonar arrays, helicopters dropping patterns of sonobuoys into the water, and crews whose only job is to find the submarine before it finds you. This is layered defense, and it's built on one simple truth. The best way to survive a torpedo is to never let it launch. The carrier doesn't carry a bow sonar. It doesn't hunt submarines. It relies entirely on its escorts and its air wing to detect, track, and prosecute threats before they get into weapons range. And that screen is massive. A typical carrier strike group deploys destroyers in a picket line, spaced to cover the most likely approach vectors. Each destroyer trails a towed array sonar, listening for the low-frequency signature of a submarine's machinery. The arrays are long, sensitive, and incredibly good at picking up contacts that a hull-mounted sonar would miss. Then add the helicopters. The MH-60R Seahawk carries sonobuoys, dipping sonar, and lightweight torpedoes. A single helo can seed a field of passive and active buoys across miles of ocean, creating a fence of sound that herds a submarine away from the carrier or forces it to go slow, go deep, and lose its firing solution. If the contact gets classified as hostile, the helo drops a Mark 54 torpedo. Game over. There are different types of sonobuoys for different jobs. Passive buoys just listen. They pick up machinery noise, propeller sounds, anything the submarine is radiating. Active buoys ping. They send out a sonar pulse and listen for the echo. And there are directional buoys that can give you a bearing to the contact. A smart helo crew will drop a pattern that combines all three types, building a picture of where the submarine is, where it's going, and how fast it's moving. The coordination is real-time. The helo is talking to the destroyer is talking to the carrier. The carrier's combat information center is fusing all the data and updating the tactical picture every few seconds. If the submarine tries to maneuver, the screen adjusts. If it goes quiet and drifts, the helos reposition and drop more buoys. The goal is to keep the contact localized and outside torpedo range. Deny the firing solution. Make the submarine choose between staying hidden and getting close enough for a shot. And if the submarine does try to close, the prosecution starts. The helo can drop a lightweight torpedo from altitude. The Mark 54 is fast, smart, and designed to kill submarines in shallow or deep water. It has its own seeker. It can search, classify, and attack without further guidance. One helo, one buoy pattern, one torpedo, and the threat is gone. This is where geometry wins. A submarine needs three things for a successful shot: range, bearing, and speed of the target. If the ASW screen denies any one of those, the shot doesn't happen. Force the sub to maneuver. Make it go deep to evade prosecution. Keep it outside torpedo range, and the carrier sails through untouched. But the hardest threat to counter is the quiet diesel-electric boat in shallow, complex water. No nuclear reactor humming. No need to stay deep. It can sit on the bottom, run on batteries, and wait. In those scenarios, the screen has to work harder. More helos, more sonobuoys, tighter geometry, and even then, the boat might get a snapshot off before the screen can prosecute. That's why the Ford doesn't sail alone. That's why the destroyers practice coordinated ASW until the tactics are reflex. And that's why the carrier's survival depends as much on the crews 20 miles away as it does on the engineering inside the hull. The Ring of Hunters is the reason most submarine captains never even get a firing solution. They're detected, they're tracked, and they're forced to break off or risk getting sunk themselves. The torpedo that never launches is the one that never has a chance to hit. So if the traps work, why isn't the carrier invincible? And didn't the Navy build a torpedo that shoots down other torpedoes? Let's kill the myths. First, no ship is invulnerable. Layered defense reduces risk. It doesn't eliminate it. A quiet submarine in the right place at the right time with a competent crew can still get a shot off. And if that torpedo has a modern seeker, crosses short range, and the decoy fails, the outcome gets ugly fast. Second, yes, the Navy tried to build a hard kill solution. It was called the Surface Ship Torpedo Defense System, and it included the anti-torpedo torpedo. Small interceptor torpedoes launched from the hull to destroy incoming weapons before impact. It sounded perfect. It tested poorly. The program started with real promise. The concept was simple. Detect the incoming torpedo early. Launch a small, fast countermeasure torpedo. Intercept and destroy the threat before it reaches the ship. It would give large combatants a last-ditch active defense, something that didn't rely on deception or maneuver. A hard kill. Final insurance. But the engineering problems were brutal. You have to detect the incoming torpedo at long enough range to matter. That means acoustic sensors sensitive enough to pick up a weapon in noisy water, traveling fast, possibly using quiet running modes. Then you have to classify it as hostile, calculate a three-dimensional intercept course, and launch your countermeasure, all in seconds. Miss the detection window by 5 seconds and the geometry collapses. You don't have time for a second shot. The program was fielded on a limited number of ships for evaluation. The results were not encouraging. Detection was inconsistent. Intercept geometry was hard to solve in real time, and the cost per installation was high for a system that couldn't guarantee a kill. By 2018, the Navy had effectively ended development. The fleet went back to what works: soft kill decoys, maneuver, and anti-submarine warfare screening. Here's why hard kill is so difficult. You have to detect the incoming torpedo early enough to launch, calculate an intercept course in 3 dimensions under time pressure, and put your interceptor in the right piece of ocean at the right second. Miss by 10 meters or 2 seconds, and the incoming weapon sails past. Meanwhile, your decoy and maneuver options are proven, affordable, and don't require a perfect intercept solution. The cost-benefit calculation killed it. A soft kill decoy system costs a fraction of what a hard kill launcher and magazine cost. It's reliable, it's been proven in tests and exercises over decades, and it works against most of the threat torpedoes in service today. Hard kill remained an attractive idea, something the fleet still wants, but the technology isn't mature enough to justify the expense and the installation footprint on ships that are already packed with systems. Different torpedoes demand different responses. Passive acoustic seekers love decoys. Active seekers need maneuver and geometry. Wake-homing weapons require cross-wake tactics and decoy placement in the trail. There's no single silver bullet. The traps work because they layer. One tool might fail. 3 tools working together almost never do. And environment matters. Deep open ocean gives the carrier room to maneuver and the screen space to operate. Shallow littoral water compresses the geometry, reduces sonar range, and limits the carrier's ability to turn at flank speed. That's why strike groups avoid choke points unless the mission demands it. And when they do transit confined waters, the ASW screen tightens, the helos fly more sorties, and everyone's alert level goes up. The myth that the Ford is invincible does a disservice to the sailors who make it survivable. It's not magic, it's not immunity. It's engineering, training, and doctrine refined over decades. And it works because the people operating the systems practice until the tactics become instinct. Behind every trap is a human being. The sonar technician on a destroyer, headphones on, listening through hours of ocean noise for the one frequency that doesn't belong. The helicopter crew launching into weather, dropping buoys in a search pattern they've flown 100 times. The tactical action officer on the carrier's bridge, choosing the moment to turn, the heading to steer, the speed that buys just enough time for the decoy to do its job. This is what makes the traps work, not the hardware, the people. The training never stops. In port, the crews run simulations. Torpedo in the water. Time to detect, time to deploy decoy, time to execute the turn. They measure it in seconds. They drill until the sequence is automatic. The sonar operator doesn't have to think about which button to press. The tactical action officer doesn't have to calculate the turn by hand. The training has built the muscle memory. The doctrine has done the math. And when it's real, they execute. At sea, they practice with live assets. Destroyers hunt submarines from friendly nations during exercises. Helos drop real buoys and prosecute real contacts. The carrier executes evasion drills at flank speed. And after every event, they debrief. What worked? What didn't? How many seconds between detection and decoy deployment? How tight the turn was? Whether the geometry gave them the separation they needed? That practice is the difference between theory and survival. Because when the torpedo is real, there's no time to look up the procedure. The tactical action officer has maybe 15 seconds from detection to decision. Deploy the decoy, execute the turn, alert the screen, get the helo airborne if it isn't already, and hope that the 3 traps you've just activated are enough. The Ford class is an $11 billion platform, but its real armor is the 5,000 sailors who've trained until the procedures are muscle memory. The ones who know that a 2-degree error in heading or a 5-second delay in deploying the decoy can mean the difference between survival and catastrophe. They don't get the headlines, they don't get the viral videos, but they're the reason our floating city comes home. And that matters beyond the engineering. It matters because a carrier strike group is more than a weapons platform. It's a signal, a promise that the United States can project power, provide presence, and respond to crisis anywhere on the planet. The submarine that can't get a shot off is a deterrent that never fires. The torpedo that misses is a conflict that stays cold. And the sailors who make that happen every single day are doing something most of the country will never see or fully understand. The traps are silent, the decisions are fast, and the people who execute them carry the weight of 5,000 lives and a mission that spans oceans. They do it because they've trained for it, because the doctrine works, and because they trust the layers, the ghost, the geometry, and the hunters to do what they were built to do. So here's the truth. The Ford doesn't survive because it's invincible. It survives because it's protected by layers of deception, physics, teamwork, and training that turn the ocean into an ally. A ghost that screams. A ship that bends math with speed and wake. And a ring of hunters who kill the threat before it becomes a shot. 3 silent traps. And 5,000 people who make them work. If you believe this level of depth and respect for our sailors should dominate YouTube, not cheap hot takes, hit subscribe. Drop a proud in the comments for the crews who make the ocean lie. Because the quietest weapon we have is the one nobody talks about. The professionals who stand the watch and bring everyone home.